Welcome to the Northeast Kingdom Voice. I'm your host, Scott Wheeler. Derby has grown from a farm community to a community on the move in just a very short time. Today's guests are two men who are here to talk about the history of Derby. They are both members of the Derby Historical Society. To my immediate left is Bill Gardine, and way over on the other end is Alan Yale, my former teacher, history teacher at that. So we're here to talk about the history of Derby, and who better than to have you guys. And Alan, I will say, you were, even back in high school when kids weren't interested in history, you knew your stuff. You made us get out and actually work with our hands to learn history.
That's probably the thing that former students come up and talk about, is especially when they came to my farm and worked handcrafts and stuff like making shingles and candles and cider press and hewing beams and stuff like that.
Yep. So, Bill, how long have you been with the Historical Society? For years?
Yeah, I think I got involved in it maybe in the late 80s. The society itself has been around since around 1980 and was formed not long after the publication of the book, The History of Derby, which sort of got people interested in the heritage of Derby. And the society was formed and has done pretty well ever since.
You know, the history of Derby, that's one book I'm often contacted about, is, are there any more? You know, and I usually direct people to one of you. Do we have still?
Yes, we did a number of years ago. We did a reprint of the original. The original printing did run out. It was done back in the late '60s, but we did a reprint, and the society has quite a few available for sale.
Right. So, what about you, Alan? How long have you been with it?
I believe I was a founding member and the first president of the organization back in 1980, yes. It got started in January of 1980, and we had a lot of old-timers. You know, the current people may not remember, but Mildred Hay was a founding member, and Lloyd Selby, and George Coles, and we had Alden Hay and Ruth LePens.
And I know Chet Carpenter came on a bit later.
But it was quite early, though.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, we could learn a lot from books. We can learn a lot from documents. But in sitting down with those old timers, did the two of you really learn things that you couldn't learn in a book?
Certainly. As you know him very well, Chet Carpenter is someone who, he's in his 90s, I think now, but his mind is still pretty much as sharp as a tack, and he can, you ask him a question about something in the 30s, and he punches a button, and it comes right up for him, which is amazing. But he has a wealth of knowledge about the early days in Derby, because it's where he grew up, and it's where he spent his whole life.
You know, the one thing that a lot of people are surprised about is Derby once had an airport.
Yes, in fact, we're hoping to get, we just finished putting up an exhibit in our museum, sort of documenting, thanks to photographic contributions from Chet, among others. Right. So, you know, that was an interesting part of Derby's history.
I wonder if I have any photos you don't have then, because I have I managed to come on to a whole group of airport photos and that.
Well, we'd welcome them.
Okay, yeah. I know there's people still alive who actually took their first airplane flight there, because, you know, with us, when we see an airplane go overhead, you know, we don't think too much about it. But back then, when an airplane landed, that would have been in back of Derby Academy, the teachers even allowed the kids to run to the window. But like Lindy Palin, who was fixated on Charles Lindbergh, he finally managed to go for his very first airplane ride back in the 30s at that airport, and as as you probably know, he then went on to be a B-17 pilot and bomb in Germany, and he just was born with a desire to fly, and he managed to do that right in Derby.
It really was quite an airport. It was rather short-lived. I'm not exactly sure how many years it was in service, but while it was very active. They had air shows, and in fact, there's a pretty well-known story of one of the air shows where they had skydivers, and one of the skydivers unfortunately got entangled in his lines and ended up in Derby Pond and drowned as a result. Yeah, the airport was a big part of Derby's history.
You know, Alan, what you're known for really is you're, like, as I say, you're one of the, I can tell where a mill used to be. You have researched things so much where you could say how many people worked there, how many wagon wheels that mill put out. So you're kind of an expert on mills on the Clyde.
Well, Scott, I think you've done a lot of great work on oral history. In other words, interviewing living people about things in the more recent past. I tend to be more of a classical historian where I'm used to working with documents. And it's amazing what you can find in federal census information, especially the manuscript where they list each farmer and all of the livestock and all the crops they grew. And the same with the industrial census where they list each mill and who owned it and how much product they did. And then if you go into the population census where it lists who worked where, then when you use all of these sources, you can begin to build a picture of the commercial history of a village.
So both of you, what was, because like Derby now is making the news because we've suddenly in the last few years have kind of become the retail hub of the region, but at one time we were actually a industrial farming community. What was the mills like along the river?
Well, in the 19th century, most mills were powered with water. And so they were located on streams. And when I was teaching at Lynn State College, one of the things we'd explore is why are villages where they are. And almost every village in Vermont, I would say, is located on a river where there's a good head of water. In other words, where the river drops quite a bit. And so that in Derby Center, we have a drop on the Clyde River it's not the greatest, I think, over where the dam on the Clyde Pond is.
Arnold Falls.
Yeah, that was a much more significant head, but it was almost a problem for the early technology because it was too big a falls. But, you know, so villages were located and they were frequently related to the industry. So in other words, there was a lot of butter tub mills, sawmills, grist mills that catered to the local community, making butter tubs so that when farmers produced butter, they would store it in the tubs and ship it south. Or the grist mills would grind the grain that farmers grew or ground their cattle feed and serve the local community.
One little tidbit that came out, we had a program recently about hops in Vermont, and come to find out that Derby was one of the largest towns in Vermont as far as raising hops back in the 19th century, and they would have been hop barns at most all of the farms in the town.
Yeah, my relatives were actually, I didn't realize it until I was looking at a map. They lived on the, I live on the Derby side of Pine Hill. They lived on the Coventry side of Pine Hill, and they were hop farmers.
And it's interesting, we're seeing a revitalization of interest in hops, and a lot of Vermont's microbrewers would like to get their hops grown in Vermont, which is not the case now. So UVM is doing research on hops growing.
But I was amazed because I went to that presentation. I was amazed by the number of hops it takes, though, to have a good hop crop. So, let's move up to today, and then we'll go back and talk about some of the coming programs. So, Derby is a community on the move, whether it's, whether you think it's in the right direction or the wrong direction, it is on the move. They're talking about a Walmart, and then we're going to be impacted in some ways by all the other development. Have you thought about, like, I think the book was published in 1967, so that's, almost 50 years. Have you thought about doing an updated version of the book? Because so much has happened.
Not seriously, but it's crossed my mind that it obviously needs some update. And I've seen like other towns in Vermont where they do a volume 2, where they basically pick up from where the original history did and bring it up to date. One of the interesting things I think of why Derby has become sort of a commercial center is that where I said earlier in the 19th century, mills located on rivers, what happened about the time our book was written was that the interstate highway went through. And so where Newport was on the lake and therefore became a transportation hub in the 19th century, Derby is up on the interstate, and so the business has moved up the Derby-Newport Road to be closer to the exit on the interstate, and I think that's a lot of what accounts for this.
Oh, that's a very good point. And then the other factor is the railroads, because no longer, like when Newport, Derby, Orleans, and Barton, they boomed because that was the other factor. Is if a community had a railroad, they were going to.
And so geography has a lot to do with what towns prosper and what towns, sort of stagnate.
Languish.
Yeah.
I think you're the only one here, Bill, who's we're all Derby residents, but I think you're the only one who's a lifelong Derby resident, right?
I am proud to say that I was born in Derby and for the most part have never left.
So how do you feel? Well, what was Derby like in your youth?
Growing up in the 60s, for the most part, I grew up in Derby Line, and it was one of those childhoods that you really would think as bucolic, I guess, these days, idyllic. And we talk about the border and the fact that going into Canada in those days was something that you just did as a matter of course, and you might wave to the customs on the way through, but you certainly didn't report. And we used to get our bikes fixed by a little old lady who lived over in Stansted, and we'd ride over there or go to the store over there and get things and not think much about it. And obviously those days have changed.
Derby Line itself was booming, though, at the time.
Derby Line was a booming town. Butterfield's, people know, of course, today is Tivoli, and they do reasonably well. But in the days of Butterfield's heyday, they were widely recognized as the top manufacturer of cutting tools in the world. And they certainly had a worldwide presence with distributors all over the place, and made for a lot of prosperity in Derby Line. And Butterfield's was a big factor in that.
And we talked about the demise of Newport was related to the interstate a bit. What about Derby Line? Like, didn't that come about the same time as the interstate, whereas it started its downhill slide? What do you think?
Well, Route 5 was the artery of Vermont, north to south, until the interstate came through. And, it was, if you wanted to go from Boston to Montreal, then you went up Route 5. And when 91 was opened and became the alternative to that, it did change the commerce. All the little tourist courts and restaurants that were on Route 5, a lot of them didn't survive. And Kelly's Tourist Cabins being a prime example up in Derby Line.
I think that was part of it, because Derby Line used to depend a lot on commerce from the residents of Holland and Morgan, and that I forgot what day, maybe it was Thursday evening, the stores were open, and a lot of the rural people from east of Derby Line used to come through. With the interstate, they could jump on the interstate and be in Newport almost as quickly as driving into the village. I think another thing that may have affected it was the fate of Union Twist Drill, that Butterfield's became closed pretty effectively, even though there's now a company in the building, and so a lot of the employment that supported Derby Line disappeared.
Now, what about we're hearing a lot now about having a Walmart come into the area. What impact do you think Mammoth Mart, which became King's, which became Ames, had? That had to have had quite an impact because people stopped shopping probably as much in downtown Derby Line.
Oh, certainly. When I was growing up in Derby Line, you had a men's clothing store, you had a two variety stores, you had a full-line grocery store, you had, of course, the bank. You really didn't need to leave Derby Line to do virtually all of your shopping. You might go to Newport more as an excursion than anything else. And like you say, when they opened Mammoth Mart, I think, was the original, and then it was King's and Ames, and that certainly would have changed the buying patterns of folks that lived in Derby Line. But it's a natural progression, I think.
All right, let's go. We've had it, well, when I say we, because I'm also a member of the Derby Historical Society, we've had really a lot of excitement. We have a new museum, and it's not only a new museum, but it's in a very historic building. Well, Alan, I know you really, when you retired, you took this bull by the horns and brought some people in kicking and screaming. And let's talk a little bit about the museum.
Well, as you know, I think it was about 1980, the town of Derby gave their old town clerk office, the little tiny building at the south end of Main Street, to the Derby Historical Society, and that served us well for 30 years. But it was a small building, and we were running out of space. And meanwhile, the town had the old superintendent's building, which was originally called North Hall of Derby Academy. It was vacant. It had, after the superintendent, it had become an adult learning center, and Chamber of Commerce was in there for a while, and it had many uses, and then for maybe 3 or 4 years it had no use, and it had come to us because there was a covenant on that building that it had to be used for educational purposes of some kind. And since we are a 501c3 educational nonprofit, we fit within the category. And so we worked out an arrangement with the select board to lease the building, a 50-year lease, and that gave us enough time to invest money in renovating the building because it needed quite a bit of work. There was maybe 5 layers of wallpaper in some of the rooms. The plaster was cracking. The bathrooms were in sad shape, and they were upstairs. And one of our desires was to make it handicapped accessible, at least the first floor. And so we had to build a brand new bathroom, handicapped accessible bathroom, and we built a ramp so that wheelchair accessible on the first floor. And we basically spent the last 2 years work teams, and it was amazing outpouring of. We had probably 10 or so people who quite regularly came and helped us on these work days, and we'd meet, I think, Thursday evenings.
And I was the youngest one on the team.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I know some of the older ones.
And I think one of the biggest benefits, and I think it might have happened during Bill's presidency, is when the Derby Academy, we became the official repository for their archival materials. And so when we got this new building, the members of the Derby Academy Alumni Association were some of our most hardworking volunteers, and they have a beautiful room on the first floor, which is dedicated just to the Derby Academy, and it's full of memorabilia. yearbooks, photographs, different kinds of pins and varsity sweaters and all kinds of stuff related to Derby Academy. And they really helped us. As I was one of the younger members of this volunteer crew, and it really worked out. We're getting to the stage where most of the building has been interiorly renovated, and we're starting to put up exhibits. We have 2 or 3 rooms yet to work on, but we've made a lot of progress in the last
Yeah,
couple
we
of
were
years.
very fortunate in the early years to have a lot of people, early Derby families, give us a lot of very nice artifacts. And our prior museum basically served as a closet for 20 years, 30 years. And this new building really gives us the opportunity to spread things out so people can come in and really see what we have and appreciate the heritage.
I know the first time I walked in, because Alan was all excited about this project, and I know I walked into that building after it had been closed up a bit, and I looked at that building, and it wasn't being closed up. It was in bad shape. I don't even think the viewers could truly understand by your description at what you guys had to deal with. And when I looked at it, wow, this is going to be a lot of work.
Well, we were fortunate in that the town had made quite a few important improvements in the early years of this century. In other words, from 2000 to 2005, they put in new furnaces, they put on a new roof, they insulated the ceilings on the second floor so that we didn't have to deal with exterior problems and could focus on doing the interior work.
The building is very early. It was originally built in 1840 and was part of the 3-building complex that comprised the original Derby Academy campus. And it's amazing the number of purposes that the building has served over those years. And we had another meeting a couple months ago where we sort of analyzed the history of our museum building and had people come in that had gone to school there, had lived there, had done this and that there. So it is a building with a lot of local history.
And it's the only surviving building of the Derby Academy.
Yeah.
The junior high school was part of the academy for 10 years from 1957 or 1967. But as far as the original 19th century buildings, that's the only one that survived.
You know, and then the good thing about having a historical society, as Bill and I recently found out, is it gives somebody a place to contact from outside the area who wants to know a bit about the history, because Bill was contacted by a fella who actually works for the National Forest Service out in South Dakota. And he had this grave on a plot of land. He's in charge. He's actually an archaeologist, and he had this person buried on a plot of land from the 1800s, and it said the person's last name and Mrs. Otis Ty, and he wanted to find out who this Mrs. Otis Ty is. Well, the problem is with women a lot of times, because they've changed their names, it's not always easy, but it took him a couple of years to fail at first, but then computers came into the scene. And he slowly was able to track this Mrs. Otis Ty to be an Ada Hill Ty from Derby. And Bill sent him to me, then we did an article. I did an article on his search, and now he has been in contact with this Ada's family, and because this woman was thought to have been the first white settler who died in South Dakota, and she died during the schoolhouse blizzard. And so they've been able, because it's in their history books about this woman buried here, but nobody really knew anything about her. Now, because of a simple, was it a phone call, email?
Yep.
Well,
It's amazing. I get numerous inquiries on behalf of our society from folks all over the country, mostly looking for tidbits of information about ancestors or did this and that. So it is nice these days to have computers that allow you to reach out and gather this stuff from the sources.
It's almost like my ancestry is magnifying our job, maybe beyond our capability, because now people on the computer from anywhere in the world can start to get information like military records that find out that one of their ancestors come from Derby, and then they send us a letter or an email saying, what do you know about this person? And we don't really have the resources that's online even.
Well,
so they may know more than we could ever have found out.
And sometimes what I do is I pop open my Derby history book if somebody contacts me. Okay, what events are coming up? And because besides just being a repository for history, the Derby Historical Society also hosts presentations. What are some of your future ones?
Well, the next public event that we're going to have is scheduled for March 10th,
Right.
and that's going to be a postcard and stamp exhibit show, where we're going to encourage folks to come and bring postcards if they have them of particularly Derby, but just regional postcards. We'd be welcome to see and share them with folks that are there, because really a lot of people don't realize the role that postcards played in recording early history. It seems though in the late 19th century and early 20th century they took postcards of virtually everything.
Right.
And
It's
they are
also
a good
going to
record.
give us an opportunity because several postcard collectors are going to be there with their collection. Steve Carpenter, who's a member of our organization, is sort of organizing it. I'm sure he and Chet Carpenter will be there, and other people who collect postcards, but I'm sure they'll be interested in seeing what walk-ins bring with them. One of the important parts of postcards, if you look at our exhibits, many of them are historic pictures that we've scanned off of postcards to show us the mills and the schools and other events in the town of Derby.
I don't think, today's postcards, I look at them, a lot of them are of country scenes, of a cow or something, but you don't see many of just simple streetscapes, because probably people are not interested in buying those, but, I look at today's, and I just don't think they will ever hold the historic value that the postcards of the past.
No, certainly not, because in clearest terms, they were the only record of that event or of that house or of those people. They may not have any other photographic record of that, and the fact that the postcards have survived for 75 to 100 years and now are available for people to look at, it's really a great thing.
Now they take a picture with their iPhone and they transmit it electronically.
Put it on Facebook.
And so it's part of its technology.
But we have but with that technology, we have that ability, if we do it right, to be able to have a lot more photos. But on my way here, I was listening to VPR, and I'm thinking, boy, I'm slowly becoming an electronic dinosaur. They're talking about these new glasses that are going to be coming out.
I heard that, the Google glasses.
Yeah, the Google glasses, where you're going to be able to look at something even and take photos.
In real time, yeah.
And I just thought, wow, things have changed. What other event? All right, what time does the postcard show begin?
Probably, we haven't got the firm date, probably 2 o'clock, I would assume.
Yeah.
And this is you don't have to be there at 2. You can just...
No, you can come and you don't have to be a member. We certainly encourage folks to come and consider becoming members, but it's a public event and everyone's welcome.
So most of our events are held on Sunday afternoons from 2 to 4. And we're also open in the summer months from June through mid-October every Sunday, except for the Old Stone House Sunday, from 2 to 4. Well, to answer one of your other questions as far as relating to being open and also people coming to find out about their ancestors. Last summer we had 2 gentlemen who had crossed the United States on their motorcycles from California, and they came to Derby Center because one of them, his wife who is deceased, had gone to Derby Academy. And so we were able, when he came in, to show him her class picture, and I think it meant a lot to them that her past was being preserved and presented in a historical way. And we've had a lot of Milt Porter, who used to live in Derby, came by to get an ice cream cone, and I hailed him out as he was going by, and I said, "We got your class picture on display. Why don't you come in?" And so we dragged him in, and so a lot of people with Derby memories or ancestors, come to our museum during the open house. But we also have a sign on the front door. If somebody comes on a day when we don't have an open house, we're willing to open them up. Probably they should call me because unlike Bill, I don't have.
I'm not retired yet. So.
Yeah,
and you only live a short ways away.
Yeah, so I could open up and show people through. The next meeting after that would be on May 12th. Josiah Grout is a governor of Vermont in the 1890s, and I got interested in him, and he published an autobiography or memoirs. And I am a member of the Civil War Roundtable as well, and I got interested in his military past. And specifically, he got wounded in a small skirmish on the Potomac River, and I began to do some research for that. And so we're giving a talk in which we talk about this skirmish, which was Miskell Farm, and Grout's role, but also his opponent was John Singleton Mosby. And not to give away the whole story, but the Vermont cavalry unit had outnumbered Mosby, but also surprised him, and yet the outcome was not what you would imagine. So that'll be a May program. And the interesting, we scheduled it then because it was April 1st, 1863 when this battle took place. So this is almost just past, about a month past the 150th anniversary of that skirmish.
The next event that we'd like to get out there and make people aware of is on July 6th, which is the Saturday of July 4th weekend. We're going to have a yard sale at the museum. We're going to ask our members and other folks to provide us with some donations of items, and also we have some items in our museum that we're going to probably consider putting in there because they have nothing either to do with Derby or they may be duplicates. So there's a chance that you may find some interesting things if you come to our Historical Society yard sale on July 6th.
Okay, so are you going to be in the parade this year? Or?
We haven't quite discussed that yet, but we possibly could have a presence.
In the Vermont Historical Society's fair they have, I believe it's at Tunbridge. Is that every other?
Yes, it's every other year.
Every other year.
And for the last 3 years, we've participated by having an exhibit on some aspect of Derby's history.
There's just so much, like, I understand them having it every other year because there's so much work that goes into it.
It's a huge event, and it's very well attended. And Tunbridge is kind of off the beaten path. You've got to be trying to get there, and they do draw a very large attendance. And people that may not know much about Derby gives us a chance to get the word out.
Now, one thing I've noticed is Derby is one of many communities with an active historical society. There's like Charleston, then Barton has a nice historical society, but it would be kind of nice like to have a map or something with where it'd be one weekend during the summer where everybody was opened at once, so you could kind of like go from one to another. I just think it'd be interesting because even though like my family mainly hails from Newport before they came, after they came across the border. But I live in Derby, so I'm interested in Derby history. But, my mother hails from Irisburg, so it's just interesting to check out different.
That's a very good idea, Scott.
Yeah.
I've been trying to persuade the Orleans County Historical Society to try to open up communication so that they invite maybe the leaders of the various local societies together, both so that they can share the kinds of things they're doing, but maybe also to have workshops to improve, say, collections management or accessioning, exhibit development. So this would, I would say it's almost a task that the Orleans County Historical Society should oversee, and I will pass that idea along.
Yeah, because we're, we, as in when I say we, I mean us small historical societies, we operate on a shoestring budget, and we're all volunteers, and so we can only do so much. And while you folks have been really blessed with a hard-working core group of people, I know other historical societies, they operate pretty much on 2 or 3 loyal people with a bunch of people on their rolls. But if you look at the people involved in historical societies, a lot of times you're thinking we've got to replenish those active people.
That's a real concern and something that we work hard to try to attract younger folks, newcomers to town that don't have a lot of heritage behind them in Derby, but want to learn more. And that's really a problem for not just historical societies, but a lot of groups in general.
I think fraternal organizations, a lot of organizations are finding that not as many younger people are willing or able or somehow getting involved in this type of community nonprofit activities.
I think part of that though is people are fond of saying there's nothing to do here, but actually I think there's a lot to do, and sometimes I think there's too much to do. So I think back in an earlier time, I mean like even 20, 25 years ago, people were more apt to join groups because there weren't much else to do, and now there's a lot of choices. But back to the development we're experiencing here, I personally feel that, especially with Newport, Derby, Jay, and like Burke, with more people coming here, because no matter what, it's going to bring more people here. I think there's going to be a certain number of those people who are going to want to know about this region's history, and I think it's going to be a very important time for people like us.
It's interesting you say that because I am from away,
right?
And if my memory is correct, it was Ingrid Chrisman and myself who sort of talked to Mildred and other people to sort of start this. So it's true that a lot of times newcomers are interested in this community they've moved into, where maybe natives, some of them may just take it for granted and say, I've lived here all my life. What?
Yeah, they don't see, and I'm that way. Like sometimes, like what I say is sometimes it takes outsiders to help you see what you've already been seeing, because you just take it for granted. Like I'll name off some of the people who were born and raised in this general area, whether it's Horace Tabor, the Silver King of the West. He was born in what is now Evelyn Page's Sugar House. Or from Newport Center was Charles Adams, the founder of the Boston Bruins. And I'm used to those are all words to me sometimes, but when somebody moves here, especially, when somebody moves to Newport Center and they're a big Boston fan, and they find out that was the home to the founder of the Boston Bruins, like they're like in Seventh heaven.
Another, we've already talked about it a couple times, the interstate highway. I'm searching for photographs of the construction of the highway.
I know where to find those.
Well, great.
They're at the State Archive.
Okay.
They have a whole series of them. Gregory Sanford, who is now Gregory Sanford is now retired.
Yeah, I know.
But I believe that guy will go on to be a legend in the state of Vermont. He's about 6'6".
I know, Greg.
His beard hangs down above his waist, and his hair is just about as long. For a man who was born and raised, I believe, in New Jersey, he's one of the most intelligent men for Vermont history I have ever met. And he introduced me to those.
Well, I guess I have a trip.
Now you know where to find them.
To the Middlesex.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, they have some really great photos of it. So, all right, as we wind down, what more would you like to say about the Historical Society? Because as I said, this has really been an exciting last couple of years.
Well, we welcome members. We are looking to increase our roles. We're looking for people to come to our public programs to help work with ours. And we have a very modest membership fee. It's $5 for seniors and $10 for working folk. And we have family memberships, so if you have children under 18, you can include the whole family for $20. So, you know, it's nice to have a museum, but it's nicer when people come and visit the museum. So we'd invite people to participate.
And you know, young people do enjoy it in some ways. Like, for example, it's funny because we think of history as something that happened before us, but I don't know. Is your photo in there yet in the yearbook?
Yeah, but one of the most popular things that we have when we have an open house and we get lots of maybe kids that are coming in, we have a whole collection of school photos from the 60s. So people that are like my age in their 50s or 60s, when they were in grade school and they were in albums, and kids will come in and they'll start going through them and they'll see their parents or their grandparents. So it really gives a connection to history for folks where we don't think of it as history, but when you're 8 or 10 years old, something that's from the 60s is history.
They also get a few chuckles because my daughter has been up here many times, and now she's 21, but she would look at some of the school photos, say from my era, your era, and even further back and think, what were you guys thinking with those glasses or that hair?
Yeah.
Little does she know, people are going to look at her in another 30, 40 years and say, and what were you thinking? Because, you know, if you can look at those school photos and look at the styles change, you know, over time. It is kind of funny that what we considered was in at the time.
Yeah, you look at a class photo from the 1890s, and the people look like they were in their 30s.
Oh.
Yeah, they just looked older in those days.
Yeah, and they most of them have a frown on because it took so long for them to, and believe it or not, you know, to the viewers who didn't know me in my younger days, at one time, when I graduated, I had hair down to here. I had bangs I could comb down to here. I now keep my bangs, I believe it's getting further back now, but that was the style. Now, what did you look like in your graduate? You probably looked like always the professional.
I used to have a ponytail.
Oh, did you? Well, I'm glad you get rid of it.
Yeah,
Bill.
so am I.
I had a crew cut.
All right. Thank you for coming on, and thank you for all you're doing at preserving the history of Derby, because, as I said, these are exciting times. We're speeding fast forward into the future, but in speeding fast forward, we also need to remember our history.
Well said, Scott.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to the viewers for tuning in to another segment of the Northeast Kingdom Voice.